Good morning, everyone. This is LadyDragon speaking. We're gonna watch the plane. Yeah, very interesting this morning. Everybody is up and on with this dog and pony show. I was going to do our usual lesson, Russian lesson, and going to see where Vlad is. But I thought, why not follow this plane? It'll be fun, it'll be different. Not only we're following this plane, but RT just said it landed. And there's something wrong with this plane because I cannot find it on ADS. It's nowhere. Snow, veux-tu t'enlever de là? Hey, ôte-toi de là. Bonjour tout le monde. Snow, c'est toi ici, là. Bon, Snow, veux-tu t'enlever dans mes affaires, là? Bon, supposément que SPAR19, c'est l'avion à Nancy Pelosi qui est sur le flight radar. Là, il y a des unconfirmed reports qu'elle a déjà atterri à Taiwan. Et où mon affaire, là? Snow, veux-tu t'asseoir, là? Unconfirmed report that she landed there. So, j'ai RT sur mon téléphone. Veux-tu te coucher, là? J'ai RT sur mon téléphone. S'il y a un breaking news, on va le voir. Sinon, qu'est-ce que tu fais, là, dans mes affaires? Sinon, il fait les affaires. Attends un seconde. En tout cas, c'est unconfirmed. Allô, Carole. Je vais garder un œil là-dessus. On va garder un œil là-dessus en attendant. Comment ça marche pas, là? En tout cas, on va le regarder, là. On fait quelque chose de différent à faire. Ça a l'air qu'il y a 300 000 personnes qui traquent le plane sur Flight Radar. It seems that there are over 300,000 people following this plane. Interesting, what you say? And Snow is playing with everything here. I think it's another dog and pony show of the fuckers. Je vais juste me prendre un autre RT, je vais voir. Pourquoi RT marche pas, là? Ok. Ça. Arrête donc, là, ça. Pourquoi ça marche pas ici, là? Oh, attendez une seconde. Anyway. On va voir si ça va atterrir là ou pas, là. On va savoir dans 1 heure. Fait que c'est pas une affaire qui va prendre toute la journée, là. On a la chance de se parler. Et d'analyser ça ensemble. Sinon, je joue avec ses feuilles, là. Je comprends pas pourquoi ça marche pas ici, là. Bon, là, ça marche. Je vais mettre du son ici sur mon téléphone, c'est un coup que... Il me manque un computer, là, ça va pas bien mon affaire, mais je vais juste voir s'il y a un breaking news, je vais l'avoir. Moi, je dis que c'est pas le vrai. Moi, je dis ici. C'est pas clair l'affaire parce que je suis pas capable de le trouver ici sur... Je sais qu'il y a des K35 dans les airs. Ça, c'est des K35. J'ai pas du tout le plane ici, là. C'est vraiment étrange. C'est vraiment étrange. C'est vraiment étrange. Je sais qu'elle a fait tout le tour. Elle est partie de Kuala Lumpur, puis elle a fait tout le tour comme ça. Je te dis, c'est là qu'il y a une pony show. Ou il est allé de même, elle s'en va de même. Snow, je t'ai dit d'arrêter avec ça, là. Ça, là où? Hey! Sit down, là. Et les drones dans les airs. Ça fait bien bizarre. Bien bizarre, cette affaire-là. Pas grave. C'est les nouvelles. On va voir les nouvelles. Mais c'est rare qu'on a le tracking exact des avions. Fait que puis ça veut pas dire qu'il est dans l'avion, hein. Pour moi, les gens sont tous morts. OK? Bon. C'est un dog à une punition encore, là. Qu'est-ce qui va arriver avec ça, je sais pas. Moi, j'ai trouvé que ça serait intéressant de regarder ça. Et même, j'ai de la misère à le loader. Vous voyez, là? Taiwan est là, Hong Kong est là. Là, il y a l'aéroport de... Il y a trois... Sam... Comment quelqu'un dit ça tout à l'heure, là? Sam... Pas celle-là. C'est quoi l'aéroport qu'on voyait tout à l'heure, là? Sang. Ok, c'est ça. Bon, c'est ça le visual qu'on a ici, là. Non. You. Ici. Sang. Oh, attendez, ça cogne à porte ou pas. Attendez une seconde, la police est ici, là, c'est bon. Oui, je vais t'appeler tout à l'heure. Ah, attendez ça, hein? La police est ici, là. Fait qu'il faut voir que je fasse un téléphone. Mais là, je vais leur faire loader. Mais il y a de la misère à loader. Il y a 300 000 personnes qui traquent ça. Faut voir que... Attends qu'il load. Je vais poser ça, attendez ça. Bon, on était là, on cherchait ça. Bon, on va la retrouver ici, là. Je reviens, là. Il faut que j'appelle Steve. vous avertis, la police est ici, là. C'est que si j'ai besoin de sortir... Bon, il y a où son esti d'avion à elle, là? Disparu de la map. Snow, là, je t'ai dit d'arrêter, là. Oh, il a comme disparu. C'est SPAR19, là, dans une zone, là. On va faire un refresh, là. Comme je dis, là, c'est bien mystérieux, cette histoire-là, là, de... Moi, je dis qu'il y a quelque chose, là. C'est bien mystérieux, cette histoire-là, là, d'avion, là. Je trouve que ça fait aucun sens. Toute l'histoire fait aucun sens. Pas d'affaire à aller là, puis c'est pour faire la chicane. Puis là, les avions sont disparus. Bon. Va-tu bien, notre affaire? On n'a plus d'avion. Et là, il y a un problème avec Flight Radar, là. Je dis, moi, il y a quelque chose de off dans cette histoire-là. Soit qu'elle est déjà arrivée ou soit qu'elle va pas là-bas. C'est pour ça, quelle heure qui est là, 9h46. À 10h, on va avoir un upgrade de RT, là. Je l'ai laissé sur mon téléphone, là. Voyons, qu'est-ce que c'est? Et puis là, voilà. Je vais le reloader par là. Vous voyez, il n'y a plus d'avion. Strange, hein? Et vous, tous les avions sont disparus, là. Il n'y a plus d'avion. Vraiment bizarre. Vraiment bizarre. Il n'y a plus d'avion. Il n'y a aucun avion ici, là. Il n'y a aucun avion ici, là. Moi, je te dis, Flight Radar, il est overloadé, là. Bon, on a des avions ici. Bon. On a plus d'avions ici, là. Voyez, il a disparu. Voyez-vous? Les avions ont disparu. Ils ont apparu puis ils ont disparu. How convenient, hein? Je m'habille, là. Bon, attends, là, je peux pas rien faire. Les avions ont disparu. On va refresher jusqu'à temps que les avions réapparaissent. Mais gars, il n'y a même pas ici sur ADS. Regardez, on les a, les avions ici, là. Il n'y a aucun SPAR. Ça s'appelle SPAR19. SPAR19. Et sinon, qu'est-ce que je t'ai demandé, là? Tu veux-tu t'en aller là-bas, là? Maman est occupée, là, avec les avions, là. Il va pleuvoir anyway. Fait que tu vas pas aller dehors dans la pluie. Bon, fait que là, ça, c'est pas... Fait que là... Il a disparu la map. À moins qu'il soit déjà arrivé. On va le savoir dans 15 minutes, là, anyway. Regardez, là. Supposez l'aéroport ici, là. 5. Moi, j'ai dit l'aéroport tout à l'heure. Je vais en regarder un sur l'aéroport. Puis un sur... ici. Bon, l'aéroport ici, là. 5. Song Sang. OK. Si elle va atterrir, ça a l'air que c'est là. OK. Song Sang. Vous voyez, il n'y a plus d'avion, là. Tu vois bien qu'il arrive quelque chose, là. Regarde, il n'y a plus d'avion. There's no more planes. If she's going to land, supposedly it's a sang song. I said no, Snow. Là. T'es pas gentil, là. On va fermer la fenêtre. Regarde, ça va régler le problème. On va fermer. Oh! Tu vois-tu? J'ai dit. J'ai dit. Il y avait un problème. On va essayer de rewinder, là. C'est vrai que là, le matin, hein, la police, L'avion, c'est pas grave, ça fait du space dans notre journée. On est habitué avec des affaires de même, nous autres. On est habitué de dealer avec la police ici, puis on est habitué de dealer avec des avions. Fait que c'est pas compliqué, on va attendre qu'il y ait l'autre, puis on va voir. Puis à 10h, on va avoir RT, il va nous donner un update. Les autres, ils ont bien plus de connexion. Les autres, ça a l'air qu'ils ont une image directe de. Ça, c'est l'aéroport Samsung. Song Sang. Song, en tout cas, on n'a pas de même, là. Song Sang. Ça, c'est ça l'image qu'on avait tout à l'heure de l'aéroport. À Taipei. Puis quand c'est arrivé 9h30, il a dit que supposément, this plane believed to be heading to this airport. On va voir. Alors, ah, tu vois-tu là? Ça recommence. On va recommencer à voir. De overloader les serveurs. Attendez là. On va checker la police. Là. Oh, il rush un flight radar. Bon, c'est ça l'aéroport qu'on disait tantôt, là. Parce que vous voyez, bon, ADS, là, il n'y a aucun problème pour les avions, puis il n'y a aucun SPAR19 dans les airs. Aucun. Moi, je dis qu'elle a changé de route ou est atterri là-bas, un des deux. Il n'y a aucun avion. Aucun avion. Moi, je te dis que c'est pas le vrai flight. Tu sais que tu peux faire fake. Ça, là, ça, c'est le K35 de tout à l'heure, là. Ça, c'est un K35, ça, là. Ben, c'est un C-17, mais tout à l'heure, il y avait un K35 dans les coins, là. Oh, flight radar, il est capote. On va quand même regarder ici, là. Parce que, tu sais, il peut fermer son transpondeur, puis il peut le réouvrir. Attendez, il faut que j'aille voir la police, là. Attendez ça. Checker ça, là, en attendant, là. Dans 5 minutes, on va voir RT, là. On va avoir les nouvelles dans 5 minutes. Je vais aller voir la police tout de suite. Sam. Bon. Il est assez ici avec moi, là. Bon, Artie va arriver dans 2 minutes, là. On va avoir un update de l'avion. Sam est arrivé aussi, là. Ça a tout réveillé Sam, cette affaire-là, là. Fait que la police va venir me voir tout à l'heure, là. Fait que on va prendre un autre Artie, là. On va prendre... Soit la date, je vais le mettre ici, là. Quand il va partir, on va écouter ce qu'il dit. Les autres, il va avoir vraiment savoir ce qu'ils sont chez où l'avion. Et regarde ce qu'il dit. Là, ça a l'air que les Chinois, ils ont mis des balistiques missiles. Attends, où quelque part, là? Ça a l'air qu'il y a 300 000 personnes qui traquent ça. C'est pour ça que je vais avoir l'image. Ah, puis regarde, ils ont l'aéroport. Hey, regardez ça, attendez une seconde. Je vais vous montrer quelque chose. Regardez ça. Regardez. Ils mettent l'aéroport ici, là. Elle doit être arrivée à l'aéroport. Il y a quelque chose avec l'aéroport parce que vous voyez ici, là, ça c'est un documentaire. Puis l'aéroport est là, là. C'est rapport avec l'aéroport. En tout cas, on va le savoir dans 5 minutes. Ben, même pas dans 5 minutes, quelle heure qui? Dans 3 minutes. Pour préparer mon image en attendant. Là. Attends, ça, là, je vais voir si ça vient où, ça, là. Je peux même pas voir l'aéroport. Tu vois-tu, tout est capote. Ah, les avions sont venus. Bon, les avions sont venus. Les avions sont venus. Ah, il est là. J'allais ramasser. Regardez, il est là, là. Il est là, l'avion, là. SPAR19, on l'a eu, l'avion, là. Ouais, ben, il a l'air pas mal à s'en aller à Taïwan, hein. Puis l'aéroport qu'on voit, là, c'est ça, là. C'est Songsan. C'est ça, là, non. Songsan. C'est ça, l'aéroport, ici. Songsan. Je vais mettre ici, là. C'est même pas le bon. C'est même pas les bons informations ici, là. À partir de Kuala Lumpur. C'est pas le SZB, là. C'est Kuala Lumpur. Attendez, je reviens. En tout cas, elle est là, là. L'avion. Au moins, on voit l'avion. Ah. Oh là, ils sont en... Bon, attends une seconde, il faut que je mette du son, là. Excuse-moi, Arthur. Voyons.
Full combat alert.
Non, je vois. Sam.
Well, Washington sees no issue with Nancy Pelosi visiting Taipei, despite Beijing declaring the move a breach of Chinese sovereignty and warning the country is fully prepared to respond if the trip goes ahead. These are live pictures now from Songshan, where Pelosi is expected to touch down in Taipei.
Ça a l'air qu'elle va arriver, là.
We pay close attention to Pelosi's itinerary. If the U.S. insists on going its own way, China will take firm and grave measures to safeguard China's sovereignty, security, and interests.
And people in Taiwan itself are getting anxious about the potential touchdown. Members of the public told us the US just wants to spread its power and influence, not help them.
Well, Pelosi touched China's bottom line. She touched the red line.
Le monde
So
sont
both the
pas
US and
contents.
China have to take actions according.
Le monde sont pas contents, là. Ils disent qu'elle utilise ça, là. Je veux juste savoir où l'avion est rendu, là. Christian, lâche-moi, là. Ah. Ah, je vais voir, là. On se connaît rendu dans l'histoire.
From Moscow to the world, this is RT. Pleasure to have you with us today. My name's Ewan O'Neill. Tensions are mounting around Taiwan ahead of a potential visit by the US House Speaker. China is ratcheting up military activity as Nancy Pelosi is apparently preparing to land in Taipei on Tuesday night. That is expected to be shortly, and it comes despite warnings from Beijing. Now, the US sees little issue with the potential touchdown, but China has labelled the move a breach of its sovereignty.
In the face of the U.S. acting recklessly in disregard of China's solemn representations, the countermeasure by China will be justified and necessary. We pay close attention to Pelosi's itinerary. If the U.S. insists on going its own way, China will take firm and grave measures to safeguard China's sovereignty, security, and interests.
And so if the Speaker does decide to visit and China tries to create some kind of crisis or otherwise escalate tensions, that would be entirely on Beijing.
While Chinese military drills have been marking the 95th anniversary of the creation of the People's Liberation Army ahead of Pelosi's potential visit to Taiwan, China's Navy fleets have been carrying out maneuvers in various locations. According to military sources, drills include the use of weapons and coordination between warships and fighter aircraft. Beijing has stressed the Chinese military will be in a state of readiness throughout the day. Here's some unverified footage to show you of exercises allegedly taking place in China's Fujian province, just across the Taiwan Strait. We'll try and show you a little bit more of that a little bit later. But I want to show you this, because this is the most tracked aircraft in the world right now. You can see the jet with Nancy Pelosi supposedly on board, we must stress that, take off from Kuala Lumpur and is now confirmed as heading towards Taiwan after earlier visits to Singapore and Malaysia. Japan and South Korea is also on the itinerary. But all those stops have been overshadowed by the potential visit to Taiwan. A Taiwanese news report claims that the House Speaker and her delegation have booked hotel rooms in Taipei and are expected to stay overnight. Meanwhile, Taiwan International Airport has strengthened security measures following a bomb threat. But it is a different airport in Taipei that I want to show you now. Live pictures from Songshan Airport, a regional and military airbase. It is where the plane with Nancy Pelosi on board may land, and I do stress may land. We're just waiting verification on that, but in the last number of hours, it does increasingly look like that is going to happen. And happens despite warnings from a number of countries, including China and Russia, on that as well. Well, with me now, here in the studio, RT correspondent
Bon,
Rachel
elle a traqué l'avion depuis le matin, elle.
Will she, won't she, on
Elle a traqué l'avion de tout le matin, elle.
Vague. It's just not exactly coherent what is happening in the skies in East Asia. It does look, though, that things are ramping up.
That it does. It looks like we may get a confirmation of a landing within the hour. So if you've been tuning in for the last few hours, don't go anywhere because we may finally have some sort of resolution and then, of course, everything that comes after that. Now, the latest here from the website, we mentioned Flight Radar 24 is the one that everyone has had their eyes on. Now, they officially updated the landing for this plane that Pelosi is believed to be on as Taipei's Songshan International Airport. So right now, of course, all eyes are there. There have also been reports that the plane has officially entered Taiwan's air defense zone. And so there really is a lot waiting on and riding on what that response is going to be from Taiwan, from China, and from all sides here. Now, a lot of the questions have been about how Taiwan is responding to this. There were reports of protests near the hotel where Pelosi is said to be planning to stay earlier in the day. And we've heard from people on the ground who say that they are concerned about the long-term impacts that this proposed visit could have on them long after Pelosi has returned to the States. Here's what was said.
It's all about American interests. They use Taiwan, they use the geopolitical measure to benefit themselves. They only care about how the government can be holding the power.
Ils disent tous que c'est un dog and pony show pour les Américains, ça. Puis on le sait. Là, c'est ça qu'elle expliquait, Rachel. Elle a dit que là, il paraît que Flight Radar, ils ont upgradé l'aéroport à l'aéroport Songshan. Ici, là, l'aéroport ici, là. Attends, c'est difficile à dire ça. Songshan, OK? Bon, vous voyez, là, il est là, l'avion, là. Ça prendra pas 100 ans, là. Mais là, il paraît qu'il a déjà rentré dans le territoire de... Je sais pas ce qu'il va faire, là, mais je sais qu'il y a des US carriers dans le coin. Ils vont-tu faire sauter un US carrier, là? Je sais pas.
Military figures about Pelosi, though, making a stop in Taipei, Rachel. So how is the House Speaker, her supporters, justifying it?
Yeah, you know, when it comes to Pelosi's decision to even embark on this entire visit to Asia, she really hasn't given much of a clear justification. And, you know, initially we heard from President Biden saying that the U.S. military did not support this trip, that it did not recommend it, and that it was concerned about how it would serve to increase tensions with Beijing, which is exactly what we've seen play out. But at the same time, Secretary of State Blinken had a very telling message when he said that not only did he not know what Pelosi was going to do, but that it was entirely up to her, entirely her decision as to whether she visited Taiwan or not, despite the fact that Blinken knows, just as the entire U.S. government knows, the warnings that China has issued, the ways in which Beijing has said that it will not sit idly by if it feels like its territorial sovereignty is targeted. Now, when it comes back to what Pelosi is saying, she seemed to almost try to make light of what is a very serious situation, saying that she was looking forward to seeing more of the Pacific Ocean, given that she is from California. Take a listen to what she had to say.
The president earlier in his term, talked about a strong emphasis on the Asian Pacific. He has visited there, the Vice President's visited there, the Secretary of Commerce and others, and we want the Congress of the United States to be part of that initiative. Of course, as a West Coast person, we see the Pacific as that's our home. We're part of that as well.
So certainly a lighthearted comment at a time when you have the world's two largest economies increasing the standpoint of each of their militaries and preparing for the possibility of a direct confrontation over what Pelosi has apparently decided.
What's the general view stateside as regards Pelosi possibly heading to Taiwan?
Yeah, initially you had some more support for Pelosi in this trip coming from both sides of the aisle, from people who simply claimed that they didn't want her to back down simply because Beijing said that she should back down. But now we're hearing more from those voices that say they are concerned about how this visit would serve to increase tensions between China and the U.S. Here's the latest there.
Nothing good will come of it. Taiwan will not be more secure or more prosperous as a result of this purely symbolic visit, and a lot of bad things could happen. These include a Chinese military response that could result in the U.S. being plunged into indirect conflicts with a nuclear-armed Russia and a nuclear-armed China at the same time.
Ouais, exactement ce que ça
With the blessing of the Biden administration, Nancy Pelosi decided to head to Taiwan. That's all but confirmed at this point.
Ouais.
Government officials in Taipei have just been notified that Pelosi's arrival.
Ce que je veux vous dire, moi, c'est que là, ça veut dire que le US va avoir 2 guerres avec la Chine puis avec la Russie. So that means that the US will have 2 wars, one with China and one with Russia. I mean, DC is the end of the United States. Allô Dominique, allô tout le monde. Regarde, lui, il est pas content.
Reports of Taiwanese planes escorting Nancy Pelosi's plane that are being shared across social media. So again, we will continue to keep an eye on this and to see when that plane does land and, of course, what the international response is to it.
And look, the implications of this are truly global. We have to say that. In terms of international reaction, what's being said? Moscow offered its view earlier, I know.
That's right. A spokesperson for the Kremlin spoke out and referred to this as a very provocative move by the United States, condemned it altogether, and also said that Russia understands where China's standpoint is here and why they have had such a strong reaction to this. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We don't know for sure if Nancy Pelosi will get there or not, but everything related to this tour and her possible visit to Taiwan is purely provocative. This leads to an increase in tensions in the situation in the region. Once again, we want to emphasize that we are in complete solidarity with China on this point. We understand China's sensitive attitude towards this issue, but the U.S., instead of showing respect, is choosing the path of confrontation. It won't lead to anything good.
Again, a lot at stake here that has the power to go far beyond just this trip that Pelosi has embarked on.
Rachel, thanks very much for taking us through all that. A lot of issues and expanding seemingly by the hour. RT correspondent Rachel Blevins. Well, let's delve into some of those points. Always a pleasure to welcome live onto the programme Professor of Politics at East China University, Joseph Gregory. Professor, welcome. Yeah, we now see reports that the plane supposedly carrying Ms. Pelosi is confirmed as heading to Taiwan. If she is on the plane, how will Beijing react to this?
Ouais, c'est ça, je veux savoir. On écoute.
Well, of course, I'm not privy to this kind of information, but given the warnings we've seen from Beijing, given the messages we've seen from Chinese military sources, given images circulating in Chinese social media of troops on the move, it won't be surprising if we see a military reaction. And this might include additional war games that get too close for comfort. It might include flyovers. We've already seen reports of Chinese warplanes and warships squeezing the median line in the Taiwan Strait. Another possibility, given the fact that the mainland is Taiwan's biggest trading partner, is there might be consequences related to trade and investment.
Yeah, a lot of issues. The US claims it follows the one China policy in terms of sovereignty over the entire nation, including Taiwan, ruled by Beijing. But do these actions demonstrate something different from Washington?
Well, many are concerned that Biden has been hollowing out the one China policy and the principle of strategic ambiguity. His characterization of China as a strategic rival, his pressing NATO to consider China as an adversary, his block building in Asia, Australia, his meddling in China's affairs in Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, his admission of U.S. troops in Taipei, his efforts to draw China's immediate neighbors into the so-called Indo-Pacific Quad, his encouraging Japan to increase military capabilities, controversial missile system in South Korea, all while asserting the U.S. will come to Taiwan's defense, and at times equivocating on the one China policy all of these collectively represent several red lines crossed from Beijing's perspective.
Et on a assez avec les calices de nazis en Ukraine. Là, il faut s'énerver pour Pelosi et Taiwan.
The biggest superpower in the world. The Biden administration saying it cannot make Ms. Pelosi change her plans. Do you think that is the case?
Il paraît qu'elle a booké un hôtel.
Technically, this is
Supposedly she booked
an
hotel.
Could have done more to persuade her.
And she's going to stay there overnight. That's even more problematic. What if they kill her overnight?
About putting U.S. service members
all things can go wrong with this thing.
And so on, for whatever reason.
Vous voyez là, cette affaire-là, là, ça peut. Là, de juste le fait qu'elle. Là, c'est clair comme l'eau de roche est dans les eaux de Taïwan. Elle l'a dit, Rachel, tout à l'heure, était dans les eaux de Taïwan. Bon, fait que là, les Chinois, ils font les préparations. Là, on va arriver là-bas, on va aller à l'hôtel. Là, elle va rester là toute la nuit. Hey, imagine, ça se fait tuer dans l'hôtel. Sais-tu comment que ça peut faire la World War 4? Parce qu'on est déjà à World War 3 avec Vlad et les nazis. Imagine ça avec ça, ça va faire la 4e guerre mondiale, tu sais. Tu vois ici, là, Kuala Lumpur, là, Taipei, là. C'est clair comme autre roche, là. Il l'annonce, là. Voyez-vous, là, Flight Radar s'est aligné, là. Regardez à gauche, là. Kuala Lumpur, Taipei. C'est plus un mystère, là. C'est certitude, elle s'en va là-bas, là. Puis on l'a dit, là, c'est dans les eaux de Taïwan, là. Au moins, là, je vais... Loader mon... C'est ça, là. Ils font pas exprès, là. Regarde, des fuckers, là. Ah, voyez l'avion, là. C'est clair quand ça va à Taïwan, là. Regarde, là. On va atterrir, là. Dans quoi? Une demi-heure, maximum. C'est l'heure qui est, là. 10 heures. Après 11 heures, là, on va avoir une bonne idée.
Does she hope to accomplish here?
Well, there are at least 3 motivations, you know.
Je veux pas rien savoir de lui, là. Ah, là, ils font par exprès pour faire avoir des... I'm in line. Faut que je paye pour voir Flight Radar. Je vais voir si je peux le pogner ici, là. C'est pas, je l'ai ici sur ADS. Bingo. Finalement, je l'ai sur ADS. On va le... Il va débarquer de... Finalement, il est sur ADS. Regardez, là, je les ai les deux, là. J'ai les deux parce que Flight Radar, il va débarquer, là, dans pas grand temps. Et je les ai ici, là, les deux. Moi, je veux pas voir ce que lui, il pense, là. Je vais avoir des filles, là. Spécial, hein, Sylvie? Spécial, hein, tout le monde? On a passé de la guerre ici en Ukraine. Il faut qu'on ait une guerre ici en Chine. Là, c'est bon. Là, la police était ici, là. Je sais pas si la police est partie, là. Ouais. Pour moi, la police est partie. J'entends plus de commotion, là. Mais je peux pas tout checker en même temps, là. Bon. C'est clair, quand ça va à Taïwan, là, c'est pas quoi. Hi, Snow. Je sais pas, Sylvie. J'ai aucune idée. J'ai pas suivi ça. Première des choses, là, sont tous morts. Elle aussi. Fait que ça, là, c'est un clone ou un body double. C'est un dog and pony show, là. Mais c'est pas... C'est quoi? Là, c'est certain, c'est pour faire le trouble là-bas, là. Mais comment que ça va se dérouler, là? J'ai aucune idée. J'ai pas suivi ça. Puis honnêtement, je sais que c'est un dog and pony show. Fait que... C'est juste pour faire le trouble encore, là. Attends une minute, qu'est-ce qu'il dit?
Entirety of China, that includes Taiwan. However, that, along with calls for the peaceful resolution of the Taiwan issue, has not prevented the US from maintaining unofficial relations with Taipei. And you may recall recently sending arms as well to the island, another issue that seems to be prolonging or indeed expanding this situation. Earlier, an American official said Taiwan is not a big issue for China-US relations, but the current situation does suggest to appear.
The United States no longer sees Taiwan as a problem in our relations with China. We see it as an opportunity to advance our shared vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific, and also as a beacon to peoples around the world who aspire for a more just, safe, prosperous, and democratic world.
So why is Nancy Pelosi's trip such a big deal? It's because of the One China policy. Taiwan is officially recognized by the United States as part of China. The USA adopted the One China policy in 1972. The USA has no formal ties with the government on Taiwan, a government that was established by the forces who lost out when the Communist Party took power on the mainland. The USA has no embassy on Taiwan, and it advocates for Taiwan to peacefully reunify with the mainland. This understanding has been key in U.S.-China relations for decades. In more recent years, as Washington drifted toward portraying China as its #1 enemy, we've seen Washington also drifting away from this policy, hinting at support for Taiwan independence as a way to threaten China.
The United States is hollowing out and blurring up the One China policy.
U.S. officials, of course, deny that they are wavering on the Taiwan issue. But it doesn't help when President Biden drops bombshell statements like this.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are?
That's the commitment we made.
In recent months, U.S. relation to Taiwan has gotten much more intense. U.S. weapons are piling into Taiwan.
Pareil comme à Ukraine. Pareil comme à Ukraine.
Sales deals, including $95 million for Patriot missile systems. NATO is expanding its presence in the region as well.
Encore, c'est collé ça dans le décor, c'est comme en Ukraine.
There has also been a heated war of words.
If anyone dares to split Taiwan from China, the Chinese military will fight at all costs to resolutely smash any Taiwan secessionist attempt and resolutely safeguard national sovereignty and territorial integrity.
We're not going to let the Chinese Communist Party dictate where the Speaker of the House should go.
As the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, you should never have to ask a foreign dictatorship or the State Department for permission to talk to America's friends and allies.
If House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visits Taiwan, it will grossly interfere in China's internal affairs, severely undermine China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, trample on the One China policy principle, gravely threaten the peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, and undermine China-U.S. relations. It will lead to very serious situation and consequences.
In this context, Nancy Pelosi decided that she should go to Taiwan. At the same time, there's a new bill put forward in the U.S. Congress that critics say would essentially nullify the One China policy.
When it comes to Taiwan, our response should be that we are for democracy and against communist aggression. We live in dangerous times. China is sizing up America and our commitment to Taiwan. The danger will only grow worse if we show weakness in the face of Chinese threats and aggression toward Taiwan.
These weapons that the USA is piling into Taiwan are a bit more than defensive.
Chinois va se battre contre les Chinois. Ils vont frapper les US carriers. Je vois pas comment que... C'est quoi la patente, là?
To a major country and escalate tension. Nancy Pelosi's trip could have catastrophic results for the world.
Un autre esti de théâtre de fou, là.
RT, New York.
Bon.
Among the reaction I've been getting throughout the day to today's developments was from Alfred de Zayas, Professor of International Law and former UN independent expert on international order, and also Angelo Giuliano, political and financial analyst. Alfred, did it surprise you how few US lawmakers came out urging Pelosi not to inflame the situation? It appeared for a lot of people in Washington, the elite really, that as long as it poked China, as long as it annoyed Beijing, then Pelosi was doing the right thing.
We Americans love annoying other people. We are poking our fingers into their eyes, and that shows that we are number one. And we don't even realize that we are cynics. We do this because it makes us feel.
Ok, j'ai pas besoin de savoir les commentaires, là. Regardez, l'avion, il descend, là. Il va atterrir. Il était à 40 000 pieds. Après ça, il était à 30 000 pieds. Les bleus pâles. Regardez la couleur, là, l'avion, là. Check the color. It's light blue. That means it's at 20,000 feet. I tell you, it's landing now. Attendez une seconde, je vais appeler Nadia. Nadia adore, je vais envoyer un message. Attendez une seconde. Sinon, il colle toutes mes affaires à terre. Ok. Land Taiwan. Or is starting. Bon, je voyais le message à Nadia, là. Nadia adore. Bon, voyez là, tourne là. Voyez là. Ouais, il parle du général. Attendez une seconde, là. Qu'est-ce qu'il dit? Ça va super. Bon, ça c'est les nouvelles de... Ça c'est les nouvelles.
Let's get more on this and speak to our senior correspondent, Murat Gazdiev, who is in the Lugansk Republic. Hi, Murat. Yeah, indeed, take us through what emerged in that interview with the top Ukrainian intel officer to a British newspaper. And what do these revelations point to?
Well, look at it this way. Russia has, for months now, accused the United States of playing a much more direct role in this conflict than what the United States admitted to. It wasn't just weapons they were sending, training that they were giving to Ukrainian soldiers, food that they were sending them to eat, salaries that they were paying them. But it also appears, thanks to the comments of the head of Ukraine's main intelligence directorate, that the United States appears to be vetting targets that the Ukrainian side is attacking. So in this case, we can presume that the United States green-lighted attacks, several attacks on half a dozen urban communities on the city of Donetsk, Kalchevsk, Novokakhovka, other urban areas, residential areas, which were undoubtedly struck by U.S.-provided weapons. These are HIMARS rockets, guided missiles that the United States has provided to Kiev for use in this conflict. The United States has tried to say that, argue that its role is much more limited. But if this is indeed true, that the United States has veto power over every strike, then it does go to show that the United States has a much, much more involved role in this conflict.
As far as military intelligence is concerned, Britain and the US have provided almost everything from information to equipment. He suggested there was a level of consultation between intelligence officials of both countries prior to launching missiles that would allow Washington to stop any potential attacks if they were unhappy with the intended target.
He was also pressed by journalists on where they got their targeting information from, and he said that they operate with real-time information, which is presumably satellite footage, imagery, which Ukraine couldn't have possibly come by on its own. So this is presumably, again, real-time satellite information that is provided to them, though he refused to confirm or deny this, provided to them by the CIA, MI6, the United States and Great Britain, basically, which provide Ukraine with targeting information, where to strike, with weapons that the United States has provided and trained Ukrainians to use, and also with the power to stop strikes that it doesn't agree with. If we take this again further, there was a strike on Yelenovka, which was on a prison where more than 1,000 Ukrainian prisoners of war are housed. That is, Azov prisoners, other Ukrainian regulars, and after an attack, again by an American HIMARS multiple rocket launcher system, more than 50 Ukrainian prisoners of war perished, 75 others were injured. So by the logic of what this Ukrainian official admitted to, the United States green-lighted this attack on a prison, as well as other attacks on civilian infrastructure, which also caused, again, untold harm to civilians, casualties, injuries to civilian targets. And this will only intensify and lend strength to Russia's accusations that the United States is playing a much more involved and much more dangerous role than was previously known, which again opens up avenues for an escalation that absolutely nobody wants.
Rendu à 16 000
pieds. Through all that, our senior
La couleur, là, elle change de couleur.
Live from the Lugansk Republic.
Bon.
Okay, 34 minutes past 5 p.m. here in Moscow. We're going to take a short break here and be back with more from our top story and plenty more besides. Stay with RT International.
OK, on va le mettre ici, là. Je vais le mettre en stand-by ici, là. Habituellement, ils font une demi-heure. Bon, là, il descend. Là, il est rendu... Il est vert, là. Là, il est rendu à 8000 pieds, là. Quelque chose du genre, là. 9675 pieds. Là, il n'y a pas de doute qu'il est à Taïwan, hein? Il est à Taïwan, là. C'est Taïwan, ça, Yvan. Allô, Mimi. Allô, tout le monde. Ce qu'il y a à Taïwan... Rien. Ça va là pour faire la troupe. Les Américains, ils sont bien mis de se réveiller, les Américains, là. Le trouble. C'est pas cool, ça. Trouble en Ukraine, trouble en Chine. C'est les deux pays les plus forts au monde, la Russie et la Chine contre les États-Unis. Les États-Unis n'ont aucune défense contre les deux. Aucune. Fait que j'ai envoyé un message à Nadia, j'ai dit bon, ça a l'air là, que Pelosi elle va atterrir à Taipei, puis là j'ai dit c'est la 4e guerre mondiale. J'ai dit appelle-moi. Mais qu'elle se lève, je sais pas ce qui va arriver là. La guerre elle va peut-être être à commencer. Je sais pas. C'est juste pour faire le trouble, là, cette affaire-là. Là. Les Américains, je pense qu'ils vont se réveiller, là. S'ils se réveillent pas avec ça, ils se réveilleront jamais, là. Ils se réveillent même pas pour les nazis, là. Bon, là, on est à 9675 pieds, là, puis il bouge plus, là. Qu'est-ce qui arrive, là? Flight Radar, il est capote. Hey, il veut qu'on paye. Hey. Non, don't think so. Bon, tu vois-tu l'avion rendu jaune, là? Le rendu jaune est rendu à 6550 pieds. 6500. Bon, là, on va atterrir, l'avion. On va atterrir. Bon. Mais c'est écrit en chinois, là. Je peux pas lire. Regarde. RT, ils disent qu'il va atterrir là, à Songsan. On va voir, là. On va-tu avoir des caméras à terre sur... 5000 pieds. 5775. C'est historique, ça, en passant, hein? Oh, regarde, là, la madame est revenue, là. Oh.
Safeguard China's sovereignty, security, and interests.
And so, if the speaker does decide to visit, and China tries to create some kind of crisis or otherwise escalate tensions.
Ouais.
Around this, Chinese military drills have been marking the 95th anniversary of the creation of the People's Liberation Army.
Ouais, ben là, ils sont venus, là, parce que là, ils voient bien que ça va atterrir là, d'une seconde à l'autre, là. 5150 pieds,
Navy fleets have been carrying out maneuvers in various locations.
According
to military sources, drills include the use of weapons and coordination between warships and fighter aircraft. Beijing has stressed the Chinese military will be in a state of readiness throughout the day and night. Let's show you this, perhaps the most tracked aircraft in the world right now. You can see that the jet with Nancy Pelosi supposedly on board took off from Kuala Lumpur, heading towards Taiwan after earlier visits to Singapore and Malaysia, Japan, and South Korea also on the agenda, but those stops have been overshadowed by the potential visit to
C'est live ça à l'aéroport.
Taiwan.
Check.
Live pictures right now from Songshan Airport in Taipei, and Taiwan indeed's second airport, an international airport, but primarily used for domestic flights and as a base for the Taiwanese military. You're seeing a lot of activity there with police cars, airport security around that. A little bit earlier, just while we were on the break, we saw pictures as well of officials. It looked like maybe even government officials at the terminus where Nancy Pelosi's plane is expected to touch down, waiting for the House Speaker to go down on Taiwanese concrete and
check.
Have her say, there you go, there's those pictures just changing now. We're at the mercy of the news agency showing us all the different imagery, but lined up with their masks on, awaiting what looks like a VIP delegation.
Like Pelosi's,
it now increasingly looks like it will be. So we are waiting for confirmation that that plane coming from Malaysia, from Kuala Lumpur, which initially looked like it was going a different direction away from Taiwan, not through the South China Sea, that it was going to the next stop on Nancy Pelosi's trip around Asia to Japan and South Korea. But then it did look like on that flight radar app that abrupt turn to the west was taken around an hour and a half ago, and we are now expecting that Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, the House of Representatives Speaker, will touch down, and that will be the highest U.S. official in decades to make a trip to Taiwan, much to the anger and the angst of Chinese officials. Again, it looks like here, again, we cannot say for sure, but it does look like that plane is now very close to approaching Taiwanese tarmac, right here in the sky. We will keep a very close eye on this. A lot of issues, of course, around this as we've been going through throughout the day. China has been saying that this issue of Nancy Pelosi going to Taiwan could provoke, and maybe that is indeed the US's intention, Beijing alleges, to provoke a conflict in the Taiwan Strait. They also warn that they're fully prepared to respond to these acts as well. Fighter jets have been deployed, not only from Taiwan, also China, and US military ships have been moved from Japan as well. The background to this, of course, is whether or not the one China policy that America is a follower of, essentially saying that Beijing has control over all its territory, including Taiwan. That is being Washington's policy. Really strategic.
Là, il y a plein de jets dans les airs. Des jets américains, des jets taïwanais, des jets China, puis elle atterrit là-bas. Tu peux voir si tu te fais pour réveiller le monde, ça.
With Taipei, but that is now all up in the air if this visit goes ahead.
C'est sûr qu'elle va atterrir l'aéroport est là.
Ramifications unknown, but this really is history in the making. The first time in decades.
C'est ça, j'ai dit history in the making.
One of the highest ranking officials in the U.S. Government is going to touch down in Taiwan. Indeed, no coherent, unified, definitive statement from different parts of America on this. You had Joe Biden saying before that he believes, or he did state that the U.S. military believes this not to be a good idea, especially the timing. Nancy Pelosi, though, plowing on, it seems, regardless of that. The State Secretary, Anthony Blinken, also having her back, saying that this is the right act right now because America wants to help smaller neighbors in the region. So very much a situation in flux right now. We await anxiously to see what reaction China is going to have to this. But right now, just to reiterate what you're watching, we believe this to be the private plane with Nancy Pelosi, who had been on a trip around Asia. Taiwan was not on her official agenda. She was supposed to be going to Japan and South Korea for more days after earlier stays in Kuala Lumpur as well. And here we have it. It now looks as if her plane is touching down at Songshan.
C'est la 4e guerre mondiale.
We saw earlier the officials awaiting this to happen. But we will not know for sure, I suppose, until we see the House Speaker disembark from the aircraft and her delegation as well. That is Songshan Airport, the second biggest airport in Taipei, mainly used for regional flights, but also sizable swathes of the Taiwanese Air Force has a base there. Just as we await this, and I suppose we can call it a historic moment, it hasn't happened for decades. It didn't look as if it was going to earlier in the day when the planes seemed to move away from Taiwanese airspace, but now it does look to be Nancy Pelosi touching down. Just some other issues on the day around this. So we know that Songshan Airport reportedly removed camouflage covers from anti-aircraft guns ahead of this arrival. As Wade heralding that it was more than likely that Nancy Pelosi would be making the trip. Also said earlier that she's expected to stay overnight because unverified reports from local Taiwanese media saying that a hotel had been booked overnight for her and her delegation. So you will have
Pas du tout.
A lot of the world watching this right now, just to make sure that
On va faire le tour, Martine.
U.S. House Speaker Representatives, the third in line for the U.S. presidency, against Beijing's wishes, stringent and quite strong remarks that this should not happen.
Escortée par des avions taïwanais.
Taiwan. Yeah, just some other issues around this. We're just hearing on the day. Just keep with us here in RT International. Just another news line. Germany promised to help Taiwan if China attack. So another big player.
Bon, l'Allemagne vient de dire qu'ils vont aider la Taïwan si Chinese attaque.
But it does seem to be an escalating situation.
Avec quoi tu vas les aider?
China warning Beijing against escalating tensions with Taiwan, they say, and has vowed to assist Taipei in the case of a conflict with Beijing.
Ils ont tout envoyé leurs armes à Ukraine.
Saying during I think it was a UN Non-Proliferation Treaty Conference, which is happening as well in New York.
Ouais, puis ils ont reçu une bombe threat le matin en plus.
As well, nuclear weapons. So there we have, as the plane is just coming into the terminus at Songshan Airport, Rachel Blevins, RT correspondent, is also with us here on the program. Yes, so a lot of anxious waiting around for that to happen, Rachel. It now appears that it has. We will not know for sure until Nancy Pelosi disembarks. What's the ramifications of this? What have we been hearing from China? What does this mean?
Yeah, you know, you mentioned the most tracked aircraft in the world. As you can see on the screen there, that aircraft has now landed. Now, all eyes are waiting to see if it is House Speaker Nancy Pelosi who gets off of that plane.
Can I just interrupt for a second? Was there an issue earlier with a second plane? Was that right? Was that verified?
So I've also been waiting for verification on that. That was actually a private plane that was also being followed, but it looks like it came up a different route, whereas this one specifically was followed so heavily because of the fact that it looked like it was going to go on to South Korea and Japan. And instead it kind of made that turn back towards, obviously towards Taiwan now. But, you know, as you mentioned, that other plane was what kind of got the internet up in a roar. It got people talking about what and exactly where Nancy Pelosi was and if they were going to make this landing. Now, it's nearly 11 p.m. in the evening, their local time in Taiwan, and so everyone is waiting to see, obviously, what the reaction is going to be to this. You know, you mentioned the reaction that we've already seen from China with reports of fighter jets crossing the Taiwan Straits. And this comes in line with the warnings that we've heard from Beijing for days now, saying that they would not sit idly by if they felt like their territory was infringed upon. And in order for this plane to land, although it did not go through the South China Sea, it did cross through into that all too important Chinese airspace. And so the ramifications of this, we likely haven't seen exactly what that long-term response is going to be.
One of the new lines coming in from Beijing, well, actually a little bit earlier, unbearable consequences was the quote from Beijing. Very direct language, that, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And, you know, when you think of those consequences, many people may think of them just in terms of militarily looking at the fact that you have this ramping up on both sides. But at the same time, the U.S. also relies heavily on China when it comes to trade. And so there are a number of ways in which if Beijing wanted to inflict consequences on Washington, they could do it, and the U.S. would feel the pain as a result. And so right now it's just kind of a waiting game to see, is Pelosi going to be the one who gets off of that plane, and what is that visit going to look like, and what really is the end game here? Because, you know, the statements that we've heard from the White House and from the Biden administration as a whole has been that they don't necessarily support this, but it's almost as if they think that they can't stop it, as if they have no power whatsoever. So still keeping an eye on.
Before I was born, Rachel, which is not today or yesterday, Washington has had a one China policy. They've said that, yes, okay, we believe that Beijing has territorial control over the entire nation. That includes Hong Kong, it includes Taiwan as well. There are fears, or maybe fears is not the right word, but there are analysts saying that that is now being eroded. So we're going into the unknown now, that if China is doing what it's been doing the last number of weeks, and just to show you this, it's been selling weapons to Taipei, essentially backing a push for sovereignty. That's what it's been accused of. Taiwan, of course, has been self-governed from Mao days, 1949, but never officially declared independence from Beijing. You can only assume, as we look at the doors opening now on this plane and await to see who disembarks from it, that one China policy is very much up in the air.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because it was the Trump administration that broke much of the protocol that was there. And, you know, you saw members of the Biden administration criticize Trump, and yet here we are with this plane watching to see.
Yeah, Rich, there's her first peek. We've just seen her. I think we can confirm that Nancy Pelosi has just walked past the open door there, and it looks like a pink suit. If you're able to make her out, she's just, as you're looking at it, I believe on the left of the screen, other delegates making their way off now as well. So there you go, essentially confirmation. We'll just wait until we see a little bit more of that. But, you know, it looks as if it's beyond doubt now.
Wow, and you know, you think of those long-term consequences, right? Because this plan, from what we've heard about Pelosi's plan, is that she's only supposed to be there for the night, to stay there in a hotel, to have some official meetings, as we can see that delegation walking in now. Yet the consequences likely will be seen far, far after she is back in the U.S.
Yeah, there you have the Taiwanese delegates making their way, just getting in place. You can see the American officials, the Team Pelosi, essentially lined up at the bottom of the steps of that U.S. airplane, which, just trying to make it out here, it's getting a bit dark, as Rachel said, just after, just coming up to midnight now, is it? And,
almost, yeah.
Yeah, just coming up to midnight right now in Taipei. And there we have it. Nancy Pelosi walking down the steps, the House Speaker, the highest-ranking U.S. official for decades, touching down in Taipei despite numerous stringent, strong warnings from Beijing. So this has now happened. Rachel, I can only imagine the amount of news lines that's going to be written on this right now. But history in the making, right? Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker in Taiwan, being greeted by officials. It's expected to be for one night, but you know what? Who knows at the moment, because a lot of the information that had been coming out was just the opposite of what is occurring now. She had supposed to be on her way to allies, US allies, South Korea and Japan after earlier stays. But she has pivoted. That flight has arrived in Taiwan. Now with dignitaries doing her hellos there with their COVID masks on as well. But 82-year-old Nancy Pelosi is in Taiwan.
Yeah, and certainly all eyes will be on those upcoming meetings on what she has to say, because as we've noted here, you know, her recent statements about this trip have been to downplay the severity of it and to really shrug it off as if it's not nearly as serious as it is. So it will be notable to see the statements that she makes from here on out, and if she gives any indication of the fact that she's aware of just how serious this visit is and just what an impact it could have on international relations all around.
Well, this was the big debate, wasn't it, for some time? What's in it for the US? Why would you poke a belligerent, an already belligerent Beijing with this at a time of, I can't remember really, a US military in that region, and I was supposed they'll be on higher risk alert now. Have their lives been put in more heightened risk as a result of this as well? It's very hard to know the ramifications here as well. Nancy Pelosi just going through the diplomatic rigmarole there of the photos of her with, I would imagine, the leaders. Just waiting to see actually who does exactly turn up from Taiwan here. I imagine here at this military airport. It is a passenger and military airport, Songshan Airport. That there will be VIP delegates meeting her as well.
And you're right, she has that pink suit on, certainly.
For power and influence itself, how does it help us? What do we get from this power move by Nancy Pelosi?
Absolutely, and you know, you look at those long-term effects for both the U.S. and for Taiwan, and it's notable because the politicians that were supportive of her wanting to go to Taiwan in the first place, they seem to almost be saying that they supported it because Beijing was warning against it. And even when it comes to those reports of whether or not Beijing would move in and attempt to take Taiwan, there were also reports saying that the U.S. officials were not confident that that was the case, that they were not confident that that was Beijing's plan. And so for a number of those people there in Taiwan, they're likely looking at those long-term effects on themselves, as they are the ones who have to deal with the ramifications directly, while politicians like Nancy Pelosi get to get back on their plane and go back to the United States.
Yeah, well, we were just waiting to see if sighing when the Taiwanese leader would meet her, so we're just waiting those pictures in the moment. Richard, thanks for now, but we have a guest waiting on the programme to offer his views to us, geopolitical strategist and diplomacy consultant to the US State Department, John Stelides, former. You're most welcome, indeed. Back in Washington, we're just digesting that, John, as it were. We've just been speaking over those pictures, just looking at the arrival of Nancy Pelosi. But back in the US, her supporters are calling this high risk, high reward. Now, I've been racking my brains. What's the big reward here? What's being spoken about? Do they really mean that?
Well, first, I think it's going to be helpful to clarify the way the U.S. government works. Speaker Pelosi's visit is not an official U.S. government visit. The Biden administration and the executive branch make foreign policy, and this is not a visit that they have approved of. Speaker Pelosi is the presiding officer of the House of Representatives and has tremendous powers under our Constitution, but this is her personal visit as Speaker and does not represent official U.S. government policy towards China and Taiwan. It's important to make that distinction. This is not a unified U.S. government action, and the Biden administration has made very clear that they don't think this is a wise move by the Speaker. However, many members of Congress, the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives, are very strong supporters of Taiwan's position vis-a-vis Beijing. They want to demonstrate strong congressional support for Taiwan's ability to operate autonomously, and that if there is going to be any solution to the Taiwan issue, that it be handled peacefully between Beijing and Taipei, and not through the kind of hybrid warfare or wolf warrior diplomacy that we've seen China exercise against Taiwan in recent years.
It's interesting to think of the ramifications of this from the people in the region, the Taiwanese, the Chinese. Do you think, ironically, it could, such a move, if it's seen as arrogance, really, that she can touch down here and there's going to be no huge implications, that could see people coalesce around Beijing and may even see a rise in support for Taiwanese reunification, exactly the opposite of what this trip was meant to achieve?
Maybe among the most militant members of the Chinese Communist Party, but barely outside of China. I think there is great sympathy for Taiwan's situation. It has been unresolved for a number of decades. Keep in mind that Beijing has never controlled, under the Communist Party, has never controlled Taiwan. And so this is a matter that needs to be peacefully resolved between Beijing and Taipei. But I think, if anything, if China overplays its reaction and misinterprets Speaker Pelosi's visit, which, by the way, she has every right to make. It may not be the wisest decision to make right now, especially since the U.S. is very much caught up in the NATO response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Probably not wise to pursue a two-front geopolitical crisis.
Ukraine,
but it's Speaker Pelosi's decision. It represents also the will and support of many American people who are
not
concerned
really the
about
military,
China's
John.
belligerence towards Taiwan.
But you had the military say it wasn't good timing, this at all.
That President Biden stated, and we don't know what exactly was communicated, that he was advised by the military that this would be an unwise decision, but that's President Biden's statement. We don't know what the military has actually decided, but we do know that to protect our members of Congress, we've seen a significant deployment of naval assets and air assets with the aircraft carrier Ronald Reagan in the waters, and also a number of aircraft from Okinawa and Japan to defend American lawmakers who are legally and lawfully going to Taiwan and being welcomed by the Taiwanese government.
Right, but that wouldn't be happening unless they were acting in a belligerent way, correct? That it wasn't. It would have said to have been on the official list of the countries she would visit. She knew this would be contentious. That's why only 4 other Asian countries were put on this list. It would be folly to argue otherwise.
She's able to go to whichever country welcomes her.
Well, why didn't she say that? Why wasn't that said ahead of time, do you think?
I have no understanding of Speaker Pelosi's itinerary planning. If you can speak with her representatives, and I don't know how to read people's minds.
No, but I'm just saying, John, with all respect,
the safety of herself and the members of Congress that are traveling with her, because the Chinese are overreacting completely to this situation. There have been a number of other senators and members of Congress who went to Taiwan as recently as last year, and we've seen no reaction like the one that we see currently from Beijing.
But it hasn't happened. This is the highest ranking US official in decades to make such a move. It's got huge geopolitical importance, and that's why it hasn't happened before. The issue of strategic ambiguity is one that's been pursued by Washington from the 1970s. So this is a huge issue, whichever way we play it.
It's a huge issue because of China's belligerent overreaction to the speaker's visit. They don't really have many cards to play here. First of all, she was able to fly to Taiwan. So they've been unable to stop somebody from going to Taiwan when they pretend that they control the island. They don't. And the way that they're responding here is completely to the embarrassment, I think, of Beijing on the international stage. However, it is extraordinarily dangerous because of their response. They have the military capability to make life very difficult for Taiwan, not just while Speaker Pelosi is there, but I anticipate that we'll see very heavy pressure on Taiwan, maybe not the main island, but probably many of the smaller islands that are right off of the Chinese coast, as well as a series, as I mentioned before, of gray zone, hybrid warfare type activities, whether it's cyber attacks, whether it's military harassment, and just extreme pressure ratcheted up by Beijing against Taipei after Speaker Pelosi leaves, to let the Taiwanese people know that they will suffer the consequences when there are these international demonstrations of support.
Yeah, she leaves, and it is the Taiwanese people who may feel the brunt of that anger.
Right.
You say that China has shown itself to be embarrassed in terms of military strength by not stopping this from happening, but is there not the other side of the coin that they've shown remarkable restraints in allowing this to happen in their backyard, because they don't want to ramp up tensions to such a degree that a conflict is imminent and there's no backing down from it? Can you see that point?
I would disagree with that. They have no right to determine who flies in and out of Taiwan. It's as simple as that.
Well, would you expect a similar reaction if Russia flew planes into Mexico or China went to Canada, in their backyard? We can't just put our heads in the dirt and say that this has no importance. Of course it has.
Sir, Russian and Chinese naval vessels come to within 13 miles of American islands and American coastlines all the time as part of Russian and Chinese military maneuvers. If they're able to operate in international waters and international airspace, which is all that this plane has done, then no, there's absolutely no legal right for any other country to stop it. The U.S. can't do anything about Russian and Chinese military operations outside of its territorial waters and territorial airspace, and the same thing applies here with China. The South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits are international waters. It's China's problem that they refuse to recognize the rule of law here.
The US and NATO have spoken about their plans to expand in the Indo-Pacific. John, does Washington view Taiwan as an ally or a military asset mainly?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important for Taiwan to take a much stronger, much more robust approach to its own defense. it cannot rely on other countries alone to defend it. And right now, unfortunately, we don't see Taiwan spending the kind of percentage of its budget to really adopt what we would call a serious porcupine strategy of making any potential amphibious invasion by China of Taiwan as painful to the overwhelmingly dominant Chinese military as possible. Plus, they're not properly training their own soldiers, their own civilians, to protect the country in the event of an invasion. So I think, first of all, it's up to Taiwan to step up its own self-defense capability and then look to see where the United States or Japan may come to its assistance in the event of an all-out military invasion by China, which is not assured. I mean, I would imagine that it would be foolish for China to undertake such a costly invasion when I think Xi Jinping has more in mind a more peaceful or sort of pressurized takeover of Taiwan, exhausting the country under attrition from the military, economically, and diplomatically, so that Taiwan finally relents.
So strategic ambiguity, that role that Washington has pursued, is that now dead?
I would say that Taiwan is an extraordinarily important country or entity for the United States. First of all, it manufactures the overwhelming majority of the world's most...
Si je te dis, merci Coraline, ce que je veux dire, c'est que ils vont faire quoi, là? Ils vont... Ils arrivent là avec un carrier, 4 vaisseaux, ils vont se battre contre les Chinois. Puis les countermeasures, là, c'est pas nécessairement militaire, hein. Eux autres, ils ont beaucoup de trade avec les États-Unis. Il y a beaucoup de choses importantes qui viennent de la Chine pour les États-Unis. Ils peuvent juste couper les trades. C'est ça que le monde, ils comprennent pas, là. C'est pas juste militairement, là, qu'ils peuvent faire les choses. Puis le monde... il y avait des protestes. Elle a envoyé la main aux protestes. Non, mais c'est une niaiseux. So there were protests and she was waving to the protester. How idiotic is that? Well, remember, that's a clone or a body double. Oubliez pas que ça c'est un clone ou un body double, hein? China promised countermeasure if regional sovereignty is breached. Puis ils ont reçu une bombe threat à matin. Avant que j'arrive dans le décor, là, c'était avant. Well, Chinese military vehicles reported being loaded near Taiwan. Mass demonstration kicked off in Taiwan against Pelosi potential visit. But she's there. Bon, lui, qu'est-ce qu'il dit? Bon. On va écouter qu'est-ce que Rachel dit, là.
Nancy Pelosi, now the ramifications begin. Now the debate starts about what that actually means. We just heard from that speaker believing that it's because of a menacing China, but I imagine there's going to be more views saying, well, you've come, Washington, to our backyard, you've done this when it wasn't on the itinerary, so you hid that for a reason, but now you've done it. You've come to Taiwan. Beijing said you should not. It's happened.
That's right. And as you rightfully pointed out, I mean, if you had China or Russia doing the exact same thing to somewhere that the United States viewed as its own territory as part of the U.S., there would likely be a very strong response. Now, I want to take us through a few of the statements that have been released so far, because now we're starting to get that reaction. Now, initially, Chinese media is reporting and saying that U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit violates the One China policy. I know we've talked a lot about that over the course of the day, what the ramifications are for that policy that has been held in place for decades. On top of that, China is also saying that it will take the, quote, necessary measures to defend its sovereignty. And the question then becomes, what will that look like? Now, we also notably did get a statement from Nancy Pelosi herself. We've been sitting here wondering what she was going to say, what her response was going to be. In the statement that she did, support for the island. And then she said that her trip to Taiwan reflects her commitment to a vibrant democracy. And you know, it's interesting there that she brings up the term democracy, because as we've heard throughout the course of the day, whether it's the people in Taiwan who have taken to the streets to protest near the hotel where she was reportedly planning to stay, or the people who have called out this visit and question whether it is actually for them or whether it is for the United States. Take a listen to some of the commentary there.
It's all about American interests. They use Taiwan, they use the geopolitical measure to benefit themselves. They only care about how the government can be holding the powers in their inland states, right? So they just use Taiwan to get their attention for domestic market.
Pelosi touched China's bottom line. She touched the red line, so both the US and China have to take actions accordingly. Only Pelosi will benefit from the elusive visit, that's all.
Pelosi's visit will add tensions across the Taiwan Strait, which has no benefit at all for the Taiwan people. I really hope the Americans won't come around to mess things up, so that we can live a peaceful life.
But if this is being seen as a united front completely in America, that's just not true, is it? Right. Because you've got top US officials, military figures, according to Joe Biden at least, saying that Pelosi stopping in Taipei is just not the right time. So how is the House Speaker, what has her supporters said to justify it?
You know, it's interesting that we just got that statement from her in which she's kind of really giving a blanket response to all of these legitimate concerns that are being raised here. And this is a different tone, notably, than what we've heard from her in the past. But it's also notable, we're still waiting for a statement from the Biden administration to see what they will say. Because the last we heard from Secretary of State Blinken, he claimed that he had no idea about Pelosi's plans and that it was entirely up to her as to whether or not she went to Taiwan. Now the question then becomes whether or not they are going to release a statement saying that they completely support her and her wishes when it comes to this. Now, I also want to bring up the previous statement that she made where she said that she was going to really explore the Pacific coast. Take a listen.
The president earlier in his term, talked about a strong emphasis on the Asian Pacific. He has visited there, the Vice President's visited there, the Secretary of Commerce and others, and we want the Congress of the United States to be part of that initiative. Of course, as a West Coast person, we see the Pacific as that's our home. We're part of that as well.
Yeah, so now a different statement coming from the House Speaker than what she said just there. However, the question remains, what is she going to say in these talks during her visit in Taiwan? Now that we know that she's there, now that we know that she is at least spending the night there, all eyes are going to be on the statement that she makes and, of course, how China responds to all of it.
It was generally assumed that she would go to Taiwan in the US, and there's already been reaction to that, hasn't there?
There has been. You know, initially politicians came out in support of her visit, saying that she needed to defy Beijing and needed to stand up against them simply because they said that she shouldn't go. But now we've heard more and more voices speak out against this trip and really raise the question of why Nancy Pelosi is going in the first place and who benefits from a sort of escalation like this. Take a listen to the latest there.
Nothing good will come of it. Taiwan will not be more secure or more prosperous as a result of this purely symbolic visit, and a lot of bad things could happen. These include a Chinese military response that could result in the US being plunged into indirect conflicts with a nuclear-armed Russia and a nuclear-armed China at the same time.
This week, with the blessing of the Biden administration, Nancy Pelosi decided to head to Taiwan. That's all but confirmed at this point. Government officials in Taipei have just been notified that Pelosi's arrival is imminent. She may be in the air right now. She's definitely coming, one source told the Wall Street Journal. The only variable is whether she spends the night. So Nancy Pelosi goes to Taipei. What's the effect of that? Well, we don't need to guess. The Chinese government has said repeatedly and clearly that if Nancy Pelosi lands in Taiwan, it could trigger a global war.
Are you here to provoke a war or to start a war? What the hell are you doing here, Pelosi?
Now, we've also heard from Moscow with the spokesperson for the Kremlin saying that this is a very provocative trip, saying that they stand with China, and also saying that they understand how frustrated Beijing is right now with the fact that they have issued so many warnings. And clearly, U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has shown that she's not listening to a single one of them.
Rachel, thanks very much for bringing us through that. RT correspondent Rachel Blevins. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with RT International.
Bon. Ça a l'air que ça, c'est fini, là. Bon. OK, fait qu'on va voir les ramifications. OK, fait que là, je vais revenir dans 5 minutes environ. On va faire nos nouvelles, là. On va faire le russe. Notre cours russe. On va faire les nouvelles. Le Vlad, puis tout ça. Fait que je reviens dans 5 minutes avec notre cours russe, OK? Fait que merci à tout le monde d'être venu. Là, on sait qu'elle est arrivée là-bas. Fait que... on va voir comment que les affaires vont se développer en Chine. So thank you everybody for joining. I will come back in 5 minutes. We're going to do our Russian course. Je reviens dans 5 minutes, OK? Merci d'être venu tout le monde. Je vous vois tantôt.